Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with episode number 112 of The Casual Author. Today we're talking to Candice Yamnitz about writing what is best for you to succeed in whatever success looks like for you as an author. We talk about her positive perspective on writing and how her extroversion aids her in using social media to build a brand for herself, as well as how what she writes is very targeted to the audience that she's hoping to write for. So, great conversation. You'll want to stick around for that. Now, in terms of updates, writing has continued to move at a decent pace. I'm still writing thousands of words per week for Dwarf Blooded, which is book 3 of the Hidden Heritage. It is, once again, maybe not moving as fast as I would like it to, but I am still getting the short story prepared for submitting it to Writers of the Future this quarter. So that's due by the end of this week. I did come up with a more appropriate title for it. I'm calling it Between Life and Death. I didn't really love the previous title that I had kind of noodled around with. It had some unintentional association with a group of people that when it's not a negative, it just the story's not about that. So I didn't want to confuse people by the title being a little bit too tied to Native American words and terms. So once again, there's no Native American roots inside this story, and I didn't want to cause any confusion, so I just changed that. Let's see. Other than the writing of the short story, I am continuing to work on my website. So I have made it so that through my PayHip website, you can buy directly from me, either get signed books or you can purchase unsigned books and it will print and ship to you from Book Vault. So I've talked about that previously before. I'm in the process of getting the ebooks put up there, leveraging my book funnel account. So if you want to buy the ebooks from me directly, you can do that as well. So it's been really fun trying to put the store together. A little bit slower progress than I would have liked, but with all of the things going on with retailers such as Amazon and Ingram Spark and whatnot, you hear various things of people's books getting taken down. And Joanna Penn from the the Creative Pen, she indicated that some of her books were taken down because they were mistaken for AI generated or something to that degree. And she said, well, I mean, this is exactly the reason I'm going indie. Going to sell direct. That's what I'd like to do as well. I'm really enjoying the figuring it out. I love learning, so I find that quite fun. But in homestead news, this last week we ended up vaccinating the goats. We are a bit late on that. So the idea is you're supposed to vaccinate. They get 2 doses of this. It's a tetanus vaccination, including some other things as well. But have to do it a certain number of weeks prior to them having their babies so that their babies are then protected by the same vaccination. So we are a little bit late, and that's only because we didn't have enough for all of them. So we had to buy another dose or a bottle of it so that we could get it in time. And I think it's going to be fine. They should still be relatively protected because they get 2 doses. Still, they behaved for the most part pretty well. I mean, I've never done vaccinations until we had goats. I did it before about 6 months ago. And yeah, some of them are kind of wiggly, but it didn't take quite as long this time because the last time we did vaccinations, we had a bunch of goat kids to do as well. Now those things are wiggly. My wife had to hold them down as best as she could while I actually did the vaccination. But this time they'll be protected prior to their birth, so we shouldn't have to do it again after. Or if we do, it will only be 1 dose rather than the 2. So yeah, that was this last week. We also moved the buck and his friend, the weather, back to their pen. They're not super thrilled about that, but they'll get over it. They I think they were disappointed to not have all the friends that they're used to. They have each other, but at the end of the day, the buck is just so smelly. And we want to kind of off gas the pen from his smell. So that when the babies are born, they don't smell like that. And we don't end up smelling like that for a year. Now, I wish I was joking when I tell you that when you get their kind of oily smell on you, it doesn't go away for up to a year, sometimes more. I have had to, no matter how many times I wash it, I've had to just store them in a different place, my glove and coat that I used when I touched him because the smell just doesn't come out. You don't really want to get it to get on all of your other clothes as well. But yeah, they're thriving now. They were mad for a few hours, but I think they've finally gotten over it. Helps that the does aren't in heat, that he's not feeling their hormones from across the way. So because they're pregnant, right? They're not going to be going through those cycles like normal. But other than that, yeah, everything is normal. Planning, we've already ordered our meat chicks for this year. We're going to be getting them a little bit later this year, just so that we have time for my wife to have the baby and for her to rest up and, recover with enough time that she might feel okay butchering. Now, if she doesn't, it's not a big deal. We have backup plans. But, with any luck, she'll feel a little bit up to it a month or two after having the baby. So that's all planned and ready to go. We are surprised with how much we use. We're not huge meat eaters, but we have a big family. So we're just trying to prepare for that for this next year so we make sure we don't run out. Now, the ultimate plan is to get a cow so that we can raise the baby cow. Obviously, the female, the cow has to have a baby every year so that she can have milk. The idea is that we will then raise the baby cow to adulthood and then use it for meat. So maybe depressing for some of you listening, but that is the current plan because we are buying beef from a local farm and we appreciate it. It's very delicious. But if we could provide that for ourselves, we already have the hay, we already have the acreage to feed the cow, so might as well take advantage of that. So we'll see if it actually happens, but that is the plan. I don't believe we have any other updates, or I don't have any updates for you today, so we can go ahead and shift over to the interview portion with Candice. Hey, Candice, how are you today?
I'm doing well.
Excellent. Very, very good. I always like to start out. How long have you been writing and publishing, just to get an idea of how long you've been in the space?
So I've been professionally writing since I think 2018. I joined the ACFW then, and I started going to writing conferences.
Ooh, going to writing conferences. I've only been to one in my writing career. Do you have a favorite writing conference that you've been to?
Well, I go to one up the road, which is Write to Publish. It's at Wheaton College. I like it because it's close. That's the
Yeah,
main thing. And also I get to meet a lot of people. I've been to also I'm going to butcher this, SCWB. I don't
that's a lot of
know.
letters, and I don't know what any of them mean.
See, if I knew what it meant, I probably actually would like do the acronym correctly. But yes, it's a secular one that's for children, writers, and illustrators.
Oh, very cool. Very good. That's right. So you are an illustrator as well as an author, correct?
Yes, I do my illustrations and everything. I've done some projects for other people. I'm like, part of me is like hesitant to call myself an illustrator, but I'll just, I do my illustrations as well.
Well, I mean,
I did
you can. Yeah, I was say,
it.
I was going to ask if you did your covers, and it looks like maybe some of them or all of them did you do yourself?
I did all of them besides Unbetrothed. Unbetrothed was done through my publisher.
Okay, very, very cool. Well, you write all sorts of different things, which I love because I'm kind of the same way. I've written some adult fantasy, I've written some teen fantasy, I've written some middle grade stuff as well. It seems like you're kind of in that all those different spaces as well. What was the decision behind, or how did you come to the decision of writing for different ages?
Well, I mostly write for teens. That's where my heart kind of always is because I gave my life to Christ when I was a teen. So I love speaking to teens and particularly girls. Um, but chapter books came around when I had my own children, and I used to be a school teacher. So kids are also on my heart as well. And I wanted to write something for my children because I homeschool them.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome. You were a teacher before. This is fascinating because from what I remember before we started recording, you mentioned that you are homeschooling currently,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, what ultimately led to you leaving the teaching, unless you are still teaching? I guess I could be wrong. Maybe you are still a school teacher now. Okay. So
No, no, no.
what led to that decision to leave teaching and homeschool?
So I enjoy teaching. I really liked being in the classroom. I love talking to kids and everything. But when I got married and pregnant, it was already kind of on my mind. I'd seen people from my church who homeschooled, and I thought that that would be a really good experience for my children to be able to be at home to teach them the way I'd wanted to teach them, seeing the books that had biases in them, and kind of me wanting to be able to talk to my kids about that. I also thought that being able to kind of like make their own education. Like we can go on field trips every day if we want to, and sometimes we do. So I thought that would be really neat for my kids. I also love being able to teach theology and to have more of a history and art focus for them.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds very similar to the way that we homeschool. Um, Obviously, this isn't a homeschooling podcast. So we won't dive too deep into that, but I think it is fascinating, right? Because your writing, there's you have to kind of work with everything to make the writing happen because being a mother of three and having homeschooling and having all the other responsibilities, it some people might feel it's a struggle to get anything down on the page. But it seems like you've found almost like a symbiotic relationship between everything because you're writing and doing all these things. So what does that look like day to day?
It looks like, I should say, every season looks different. Right now, I'm launching a book,
Sure.
so there's a little bit more of an imbalance. I think it'll become a little bit more balanced right after the book launches. So I wake up a little bit earlier, have my quiet time, do my writing time. Sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes because the kids want to snuggle. Um, then after that, it's a little bit of cooking and then going on social media and liking posts and posting my post that I made the night before. Um, so there's a lot of kind of like back and forth. There's teaching. Once the teaching's done, I can go and check if people commented. People always comment. And then afterwards, it's back to teaching the things I forgot to teach, or it depends, because then there's also speech therapy, there's chiropractic, there's also co-op. So there's a little bit of that mixed in.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's just chaotic. You learn to use 10 minutes really wisely. You learn to wash dishes and listen to someone's arc. It's just how it works. And now I just get arcs sent to me as Word documents because I need someone to read it to me. I don't have time to sit down and read anymore for the most part.
Yes, I'm actually the same way. So I do prefer physical books, but everything you just described sounds exactly like our life here as well, with the appointments and the co-ops and all of the things going on in addition to the homeschooling. So I can relate and I can totally understand the power of 10 minutes if you can use it effectively. So it's a skill that you have to gain. But so let's talk a little bit about your books because you're religious, and you've made that clear. And I'm curious to know are your books from a religious standpoint, or are they just written from like an appropriate, clean standpoint for all ages? Because I know some people like to write religious type fantasy, which is excellent if that's what they're looking for. But I wasn't sure if that was the tone of your books.
So I wanted to write a high fantasy world that had an edifying message. I don't necessarily, what do I say? You're not going to see Jesus in my books
Okay, yeah,
because I write fantasy. And I think that in order to write that clearly, I would have to actually make it Jesus.
right.
And I'm writing more, if anything, it's allegorical,
Hmm.
but I wanted it to be able to be read by someone who is non-religious as well and to just enjoy a good story.
Absolutely. I
The
mean,
reason
yeah,
sorry, the reason
please.
I got into this was because I was reading all these YA books and eventually I put them down and like, wow, I feel really dark right now. Like there's something that's missing from this book, or like I just didn't like the message, but I loved the book. I got caught up in the world. Also, sometimes the scenes had a little bit too much hanky panky in them. And I was like, okay, this is not great. And I was mentoring teen girls at the time. This is not what I want them reading. And this is not what I want my kids reading. So I wanted to write something different.
I think that's an amazing description. I usually tell people that I'm a rated PG adult. Like, I obviously understand the way of these things, but I don't need to read about them. Like, I'm reading stories because of the adventure and the excitement and the magic and the world building and everything. The hanky panky, as you so aptly described it, is not something that I want to read. And yeah, I remember being a teenager, and I don't I don't know if books are just different nowadays, or if maybe I never came across that even once. And I have read tons of books. It seems like it's more prevalent these days, and so it's almost more difficult to find appropriate books for teenagers. At least that's what it feels like.
Honestly, in my day, this I don't know if this ages me, but there was no YA. You either read middle grade books or you
Mm-hmm.
read adult books. There was
Sure.
nothing in between. So I do actually remember in my library picking up a book and I was like, whoa, that was really graphic, and put it down. But I remember that sticking with me. I also didn't read a lot when I was in high school. I'm
Okay,
telling
fair
you.
enough.
Yeah, I did not read. I didn't like reading until I was a senior in high school.
I
And
mean,
I read Pride and Prejudice and Lord of the Rings, and I fell in love with Lord of the Rings. So yeah, that's my story about like getting into like reading in general. So I kind
that's
of have like a big impact. Like I want it to be more Lord of the Ring-ish, but then also with that fast paced, like new feel.
yeah, I think it's funny that you didn't you didn't like reading, and the first books you started with were Pride and Prejudice and Lord of the Rings. I mean, those are some pretty heavy. They're great. It's just funny from some, oftentimes people who don't like to read because it's so arduous and long-winded and it just takes so much time. But I think it's awesome that you fell in love with those books and dived in. But I think it's cool because I also agree. I think there's definitely been a shifting of story, whether or not it's good or bad, but it's people want a little bit more fast-paced and fast-moving stories, but there's something endearing and lovable about those really beautiful prose, those beautiful written books like Lord of the Rings and Pride and Prejudice. And so is that kind of what you were attempting, infused with obviously clean content for, I think Unbetrothed is your high fantasy, is that correct?
That's correct. So Unbetrothed and Ruthless. So both my YA. In fact, they're in the same world, like
Okay,
story world, and
yeah.
um, Unbetrothed, like the main character is Beatrice. Her mom's story is the one is Ruthless. So
I was about to ask that because I was looking at it and Ruthless, the subtitles, and is it Agatha C novel? Is that how you
yeah,
pronounce it? I was like, that looks like they're related, that like they're from the same world. You're creating a multiverse. Is that what you're going to be doing with your books? Is that the future of your books?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Honestly, this whole thing, I'm just like, I think I'm winging it, really. Or maybe honest with this one, it was very interesting because I was like, okay, I'm going to write my sequel because people keep asking me for a sequel. They're like, when's the sequel coming out, Candice? I'm like, well, I have to actually finish it. And I finally finished it, turned it into my publisher. And it's like, okay, so is it coming out now? It's like, well, I have to go to my publisher first because I signed a contract. So I had to wait for that one, but they gave me back my rights for, well, because they have first. I don't know if people know how it works, but you sign a contract and you kind of give away like they have first viewing rights, and any book that is in the unbetrothed world must go through them first. So I got this one back first. I'm like, I'm publishing it. People keep asking for more stories. And wow, I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. I could hear my kids in the background. So I'm like,
I can't. So
oh, really?
that's
That's good. That's good.
then it's no problem. I lose my train of thought often, so I totally understand that. But so potential multiverse of your books, not really sure, just kind of depends. Um,
I've
please.
written like 5 books. And
Oh,
so, like, there's Unbetrothed, then there's the next one. I don't know if I want to give away the name or just save it for a day. No, I'll give
keep
it
it a
away. It's
secret.
called Untamed. Yeah,
Okay.
it's called Untamed. I'm going to give it away anyway in a week or so, or I don't know when. But Untamed, and those two go together. Then I have this one, Ruthless, and I have like 4 other books connected to it. So yeah, that's the whole world, and it's connected to 2 characters in Unbetrothed. And then there's this other character in Unbetrothed that has no name and is in it for about zero point 0.2 seconds. And I was meant to write a backstory about it, and I wrote an entire novel. I know. And I also wrote, not, I didn't write the next one, the sequel to that one, but I did write a synopsis. So, and that one's with publishers. So we'll see what happens with that.
So you have a lot of content, which is excellent. Now, those all haven't been turned into the publisher yet for review. They're still just like you're probably need to revise them, I would imagine, a little bit before you get to that point.
So I turned them all into the publisher,
You
and
did.
my
Okay.
publisher isn't publishing right now, like a lot of fiction. I haven't seen it come out. So they passed on all the projects. I don't know exactly the reason why. So it could be that they're just not publishing much, but I don't know. So that means I have a bunch of different choices. And I think I'm going to Kickstarter the sequel to Unbetrothed because I cannot pitch it to any publisher. And publishing an entire novel and doing all the editing with it, it's quite costly. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do Kickstarter. And I have people who said they wanted the next one. So I wanted to see if people still wanted it.
Yeah, I mean, I think
And
that's awesome.
Yes, and I feel like God provided for this one, honestly. I had a developmental editor. I had a line editor who came to me and like, hey, let's do an exchange. I'm like, okay, let's do it. I also had another person, like a copywriter, yes, who also did the exact same thing just right when I needed it. And so that one was provided for. So I mean,
And that is awesome. I mean, what an incredible story. And one other thing that, I think that encapsulates your passion, what excuse me, I can't even speak today. You indicated community as being an important part of being an author. And, that is a prime example of community and how you said that book was taken care of by relationships and connections that you have with various people. So for you, how else does community play into your role as an author?
I honestly wouldn't be writing if I didn't have community. So even getting started, I said I was part of the ACFW. There was a group that met in my library. I went there. I read my work first time reading it to anyone. And lo and behold, the people who are next to me, and one of them is an editor who is professionally working at like Tyndale, or not Tyndale. She was at, well, I don't know, she was at some big publishing house. The other one, she had like 30 books written already. And I'm sitting there reading my first writing ever to them. It was terrible. I could tell by their faces, but they were very kind. So yeah, they helped me and they taught me how to write and they inspired me, kept me going, even though I needed a lot of work. Another way community has played a huge role is now I'm part of like a Christian mommy writing group,
Okay.
and we do challenges with each other. What else do we do? We help promote each other's work. I message them every day. I'm like, I wrote 500 words. I wrote nothing. And we're also part of like an engagement group for Instagram. So I mean, it's kind of like a daily basis. I feel like I know them. I've only met maybe like three of them in real life. Everyone else, they're just around the world and writing. We share things with each other.
I mean, I think that's awesome. So I think the biggest challenge for a lot of authors, not all authors, like this isn't speaking for everybody. The biggest challenge for many authors is that they're introverted. Maybe they don't feel comfortable or they don't know how to connect with people to create that community. So, what recommendations or advice do you have for someone who is, maybe introverted, secluded, and they want community, but they don't really feel comfortable and know how to go about doing it?
I might not be the best person for this. I am an extreme extrovert.
I can tell.
Extreme. Yes. So like I will be uncomfortable and I dig myself in a hole even more continuing to talk. It's like, Candice, you need to shut your mouth. This is not the time. So yes, and honestly, the first time I started making friends on Instagram, it was so awkward. I was just like, "Hey, so do you want to read a book together?" Like literally DM someone or commented on someone's post, "Do you want to read a book together?" And they're like, "Okay." They were probably introverted. I think she is introverted. We ended up reading the book together. I finished it. I did this with some other person. We're still friends. We like pray with each other and talk to each other about life. It's so random. I've done it with a few other people, and some of them we're not friends anymore, but we read a book together. Okay, so we had a common experience, and I think that's the really cool thing about books. So if you are introverted, you want to make other writer friends. Yeah, like the good part is you don't have to actually look them in the eye to ask them all these weird questions. You could kind of DM them, and if it's super awkward, they might not talk to you for a while, but that's okay. It's on the internet. Come on now.
That is so funny. Okay, so the moral of the story, if you're listening, if you're introverted, you need to find an extroverted person to do the work for you, it sounds like. Find an extroverted friend. Answer to all. No, but what you said, it does, the pressure is taken off a little bit through social media and or just messaging. I think what you said is kind of the crux of the issue. A lot of introverted people will be afraid to message them because they'll be afraid they'll offend someone or weird someone out. And I think it's funny you said, "Oh well, they may not talk to you for a while, but oh well, like whatever. As long as you're being kind and thoughtful, then people can make whatever decisions they want." I think that's the hardest thing for introverted
I
people to
also
feel
think you have to
comfortable with.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I also think you have to know the culture of the different social medias. So, I mean, just that, like on TikTok, people aren't really DMing me. On TikTok, I usually get messages on my post, and then that might lead to a DM. So that's kind of the culture there, as far as I can see. And like Twitter, we used to be more of a thing, and that one we did not DM. But in Instagram, I put up a story and it's interesting. You can comment there and it goes directly to my DM, so it's not weird.
Yep, that's true. And I forget I'm not a social media master, so I forget about the whole commenting on stories and it goes to DMs. But the culture of different social media is another thing that feels challenging to even crack. But we're not here to talk about social media. It is a very great thing, has its own challenges, has positives, has negatives. So if you're into it, excellent. If you're not, also excellent. Just depends on
I will
you.
say social media is one way to market. And I want to also say, if you are someone who wants to start writing, you have to also think about the marketing end of it.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean that you have to be all in social media. It could mean that, but it doesn't have to mean that. It could also be Amazon ads, or you do a bunch of podcasts, or like different things. But social media is a really nice component because you get to talk to your audience about your message directly. So that's the nice part about it. And I do recommend getting to know at least one platform.
Yeah, and if try to focus on one. Obviously, I'm not saying silo into one, but I've just heard a lot of people say when they try to spread themselves too thin to everything, it's hard to give it adequate enough attention. I know I felt that before when I was a new author. I wanted to get into everything and I created all the accounts and had all the profiles, and I was just like, I'm overwhelmed. Like I did
Yeah.
this too much.
Or what works with one doesn't work with the other. Like
Yeah.
I will
Yep.
have one post on Instagram just blow up. Like it has thousands of views. I'm getting like 1,000 likes on this one on TikTok. It is a complete flop.
Hmm.
No idea. I
Yep.
think it's just a different culture.
Well, so I was talking to do you listen to the Creative Pen podcast by any chance?
I feel like I've listened to that one a couple times.
Her name's Joanna Penn. I'm bringing it up because I had a conversation with Joanna Penn a couple of weeks ago, and she was asking me. This is connected to your religious affiliation and the fact that you are religious. Um, she mentioned she said, "Well, you're religious, aren't you? How often do you mention that in social media posts and or your email?" And I say, "Well, I don't." Because I don't want to chase anybody away. I'm just trying to provide fun stories that are clean and appropriate for everyone. And she's just like, well, if they don't like that, then you don't want them to be in your audience anyway. I was like, oh, hey, I guess that's a good point. She's like, you want people that connect with you, and if they get offended by the fact that you're religious, that's their own problem. So the reason I bring that up is I know posting on social media, there's that discomfort of being yourself and being afraid to mention anything, particularly within the clean or religious space or just, the space that we're in writing. It doesn't, a lot of people on TikTok don't respond well to that. There's a lot of, yeah, people don't like it.
No, honestly, I'm trying to like train my algorithm on TikTok to show me like more people who actually do like it, because there are people.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of finding them. They aren't the biggest voices out there, but there are people. So it's just a matter of finding them. There's so like just considering that like I have right now, I'm trying to get to 10,000 followers on Instagram, which is kind of insane. Like if you thought of 10,000 people in a like room, that would be huge.
That's a lot.
But there are people who are interested in the topic. And if you consider the whole nation of like in the US, I'm in the US, that's a lot of people. There are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who would enjoy your voice and who want to hear it, and in fact, probably need it. So I think that's the consideration you make. Like, okay, if I don't share this, I'm not attracting these people. This, I'm not attracting, like, who's my main audience here? I
That
think my biggest
requires,
thing I'm nervous about is when going to bookstores and maybe they won't want me if I tell them I'm a Christian.
have you run into that at all by any chance?
No, no, no.
No.
I have not run into that. They've been incredibly supportive. I do write more, they're considered secular because I'm not sitting here talking and I'm not trying to make you into a Christian. I just want to write a really good story.
Right.
And it is monotheistic for the most part, like my stories. But I mean, if you look at all the fantasy stories, a lot of them have something, like whether or
Mhm.
not there's gods and goddesses and whatnot. So I feel like it just fits in the market right there perfectly, that I could write about religion without having to write about being a Christian.
Well, and I think So once again, if you want to write allegorical stuff, if you want to write very pointed Christian related, that there's nothing wrong with that. There's obviously a market for that. There's readers for that. I think there seems to be this incorrect association of Christian authors with the religion itself and whatever their perception of that religion is. And so when they find it like, oh, immediately that's a no for that book. It's like, okay, well, I mean, there's none of that in there. It's a fun high fantasy world, in what for whatever age range, and it's just a great adventure with great characters. So I'm just trying to entertain. Um, but everybody has the ability to have agency and choose what they want, so that's okay. As long as you are true to yourself and you know what you want to write, then I think that's the most important. So, but so for you, what has been the biggest challenge? I mean, it sounds like marketing perhaps has been some of the bigger challenges. But other than that, what are some of the biggest challenges with writing in your space?
I think it's just, you get into writing to write books, okay? And marketing is a huge thing. You don't get into writing books because you want to market your books. But then there's also that element of, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, that roller coaster of emotion. Now I have to write another book, but I'm sitting here thinking about my reviews for this book. Oh, and that
Hmm.
negative review just came in, and I'm like, okay, maybe I just can't write. I'm a bad writer. Like you have these negative like self-talk and stuff, and you're just like trying to write something pretty. And of course, it's a first draft. It's horrible. Like it's not pretty.
Hmm.
So there's a little bit of that. Or right now, arcs. Okay, so I'm sending out arcs. I know there's going to be errors, things pass, and then I keep on getting those like, oh, and there's this little tiny error with the spacing. Yes, okay,
Hmm.
I'll fix that. So it's like it's very discouraging. So whenever I get to this point where I'm like, okay, I want to just write and forget about all the marketing stuff, I can't because I'm sitting here, I'm launching a book. I can't forget about it. And I really would just want to write.
That is a very great explanation to the challenge. Because I was literally in a I can't write anything, I'm a terrible author phase like 7 days ago. We all go through it because it's, you see a bad review or somebody complains about something or, someone gives a piece of feedback that whether or not it's true doesn't feel great. So that's always constantly coming in. I am coincidentally in a just writing phase. We won't get into the reasons why, but I'm just writing things and sitting on them for a while. But I think it's great that seems like you understand the times and seasons thing. I think that is the most important thing to learn is there's a time and a season for everything. Sometimes there's a lot of time for writing. Sometimes there's not because you're focusing on marketing or, something else that's more important at the time.
Yes. So right now it's definitely a little bit more marketing. I can't help it. I want to get some of my books that have been sitting there for so long. So a lot of people ask me, it's like, how do you write so much? I'm like, well, actually, I wrote this like 2 years ago. I wrote this 5 years ago, and it's been sitting on my computer. I had a slight panic attack yesterday, thinking, I'm like, what if that book I wrote disappeared and it somehow
Hmm.
I haven't sent it to anyone? I've had that happen before too. Well, it happened yesterday. So yes. So right now is definitely marketing season, but I can't wait to get back into editing season. I used to hate editing. And now I just love it. Everything's already written for me. I just have to fix it and make it pretty.
Okay, so we're pausing on that because I have not reached the I like editing phase yet. So, what is your secret? How did you get over that hump into, because yeah, I still don't enjoy editing. It's not something I enjoy doing at all. And I've published
Yeah.
8 books. So, I still don't like it.
So I mean, I'm going to be real. The first draft stinks. The second draft stinks. The third draft, I'm like, no, this is never happening. I get to my fifth draft and I'm like, okay, this is not too bad. It just needs a little this and ooh, this would make it really nice. And if I get really in the mode, like I will just drive my car and I'm like, oh, I have an idea to fix that scene, write it down, and it becomes exciting eventually. I won't say that editing the first draft. And then my other issue is that I am a editor as I go. And now
Oh,
it might
okay.
not seem like an issue, but the problem is I'm sitting there, I write chapter one. I love chapter one. I'm getting really into it. Next time I go around to write, I'm like, let's go back to the beginning of chapter one. I love chapter one. I'm getting really into it. So I will continuously go back to the beginning, and I will have these beautiful 6 chapters. And now I'm done. I'm like, wait a second, but where's the rest of the story? I'm only halfway through Act 1. So when I say draft one, I mean draft one, like the first one, but like when I get to the entire book is complete, the first half is more like draft 6, and the second half is draft 1. So it's a
Interesting.
little bit more fun when some of it looks pretty already, and some of it's just a hot mess.
Fascinating. I don't write that way. I'm fascinated how that works for you because obviously it works for each person however they want to. Some people edit as they go. I don't. And I think for me, part of the reason I don't edit as I go is because I don't always know fully who the characters are and the decisions they're going to make until the book is done. And then I can go back and by when I go back and read chapter 1, I'm like, oh, that's right, this is all wrong. Because about a third of the way through the book, I really understood this character, who they were. They wouldn't have reacted this way in the first chapter, right? And they would have done this instead. And so, how do you um did you plan? I mean, you mentioned you didn't used to plan, so maybe you plan out everything pretty clearly, so there's not a fear of inconsistencies writing that way. But how do you ensure that it's all consistent throughout if you're going back and editing like that?
I don't.
Okay,
So that sounds terrible, but like I'm not a detail person. And this is
sure.
how come I struggle with indie, because I love like the beautiful, like I get to design my own book cover details. I'm terrible with them. So I will get them all inconsistent. I have to go back and fix all those details. And I will like, do I keep the bad detail? No, I have to fix it midway through all the details. So this half is good. That half needs to be fixed from those details. So yeah, now I'm a little bit better. Well, especially if you're writing in the same universe, I will say that helps a lot too, because I'm like, I know the characters, I know the magical system, I know their food, I know how people act, the culture already. I know how the sun and moons work. Yes, there are 2 moons, and I'd have
Of
researched what would
course.
happen if, of course. Um, so yeah, so that really helps things go along a little better. I usually have like a picture in my mind and like of people who they are. It's like, okay, that's like my cousin and this person if they were put together. Yes, okay, that's how they're responding to this. Um, so yeah, that helps a lot too when you have kind of like a picture in your head and if you're in the same universe. So that helps. Now I am a planner. I used to not. I did not plot when I did not plot. I mean, it would go off in like crazy directions and I have to rewrite like a third of the book. Because
Fascinating.
I'm plotting, I don't have to do that as much anymore. And I plot with an Excel spreadsheet. I know it's crazy, but I because I'm more of a pantser, like I'm naturally a pantser. I like having a lot of flexibility. I just want to know what action beat is supposed to be happening here and where I'm supposed to end up, and I will get you there. I kind of like that idea of just like, okay, I know where I'm supposed to end up, and most of the time I end up there. And then you get the end of the book and they kill someone randomly. You're like, okay, that was not planned, but that was really fun.
Well, I can understand that for sure. I totally understand that. Using an Excel spreadsheet is actually extremely logical. I don't know if that's weird. It doesn't seem weird to me. It's a very good way to organize things. But um, part of the reason I don't do a lot of plotting is because I feel like it steals the fun, at least for me. Because I want to not know what's 100. Like I have some idea mentally of where I think it's going to turn out, and for the most part, I hit what's mentally the end of the book, or maybe three-fourths of the book. I think something's going to happen, and I do reach that. Normally, it happens with wild twists that I'm not expecting, like yeah, deaths or someone who's supposed to die not dying and living. It's like okay, well now I guess I got to account for that. So I just think it's a fun process. But how far ahead do you plot? Are you looking forth to like looking forth? That was very a scriptural way of saying that. Look forward to multiple books when you're doing this plotting, or do you usually just kind of stay within one story at a time?
Well, I don't know. Like what Unbetrothed, I did not plot out every other book. In fact, I stopped in the middle of Unbetrothed and I'm like, ooh, this would be a really fun plot twist if the mom was an assassin in her past life. And
Hmm.
not like past life, she had different lives, but like before she had her daughter, because there's so many things you don't know about your parents. It's like when you're a kid and you think they're like this perfect people and you find out no. So I decided to play with that a little bit, stopped in the middle, wrote a huge chunk of Ruthless, and then went back to writing the rest of Unbetrothed. And I kind of do that throughout. I kind of like pause and I'm like, ooh, I want to play with this a little bit more. I have like a little sheet where I just have fun with my story and go off in left field. When I was writing the sequel to Ruthless, I was like, okay, this is how it's going to end up. And at the very end, it completely went off left field and I loved it. It was fun. And I think that's okay. I think I'm okay with not sticking to the plan.
But and I think that's the first rule of thumb for anybody who's listening. There's so many books out there will tell you to be a plotter, don't be a plotter, whatever. I think the first thing you need to come to realization is what feels most comfortable to you and are you okay with it? Right? Because I remember when I was first a discovery writer or pantser, all I was seeing was plot this, plot that, you should do this, you should do that, and it was not the way I was doing it. And every time I tried to do something that didn't feel comfortable to me. It just writing was hard. I didn't like it. It was just not fun anymore. But once I came to the realization that I was like, this is working for me and I feel comfortable in it, then writing is fun. So just know what works for you and be okay with it.
Exactly. I'm like, you just kind of go with the flow. Like, okay, if you really need to, because I know people in real life who are like, I just need to have everything planned out. This is great. I'm
Mhm.
not that person. But I'm writing in 10-minute segments sometimes, 30-minute segments. So I kind of have to have like my imagination going about that next scene. And sometimes it doesn't work and sometimes it does. I have this other book that I have random scenes in my head for it. I know how it's going to end. I know the middle, I know the beginning. I don't know how anything comes together. And I think that's where it's fun for me, just enjoying that adventure. And it's a okay, so it's not a choose your own adventure, but it's kind of like a one choice like changes everything and it
Hmm,
splits up into two different stories. So it's a parallel story at the end.
very cool. It seems like you've written like a million books by the way you're talking about things. So,
Now I've written maybe like from start to finish, maybe 12,
I mean, that's
but
still a lot.
they're not published. I mean, they are in my file folders, just sitting there. And then I have
Yeah.
sometimes multiple versions of the same book where I'm just like, oh, this one's told in third person perspective and it has this scene, and the other one is in first person. Oh, and I changed some names.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, those details. Ugh, the details, I struggle with those as well. But that is a whole different conversation. Organization is not my strong suit, but some people are great at it. They've got
Yeah.
perfectly organized things. Not you. Well, we can
I mean,
relate
I
on
have
that front.
Excel spreadsheets. It's just a matter of like, how many spreadsheets I have.
Okay, I'm not crazy. I was seriously just as when you were saying that, I was like, yeah, which one? I have 12. I've started 12 different ones for the same book.
Yes.
I don't know
Well, it's like
why
what
that
today. It's
is.
fun.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, good times. Well, I mean, it was very insightful and I guess encouraging to know that I'm not crazy on a lot of these things that we can relate. But this has been an incredible conversation. I before we end, I always like to ask where can people find more information about you and your books if they want to check them out.
So you can go to my website, CandiceYamnitz.com. I try to make it easy. Also, I'm on Instagram all the time, so you can go over there. You could DM me. I'm always there. I also am on Facebook. I do have my own page, but most of the time I'm sharing from my Instagram, and I'll go and check there eventually.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I love the eventually because sometimes the eventually is 2 months and sometimes it's a year. No, I don't think it's ever been that bad, but um, well, very good. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Talking to Candice is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Infectious. She's a very positive person and easy to talk to. So I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Next week, we will be talking to Andrew Johnston about bringing a fantasy world into reality. We talk about how he represents um, different disabilities within his book. He's autistic himself. He recognizes and has some characters that have similar conditions in his fantasy books, how he goes about doing that, but also the amount of time he spends preparing and thinking and imagining his world. He goes very into detail about the creatures that he has in there and all these really cool imaginary aspects that enhance his story. So his book is coming out soon. I think you'll really enjoy that conversation. If you'd like to join me on the podcast, just head to thecasualauthor.com and fill out the form there, or you can always email me at dan@thecasualauthor.com. I'll respond as quickly as possible. I'm not always perfect at answering emails, but I do have dedicated times throughout the week I do get back to them. So you may have to wait a couple days, but know that I will get back to you. I appreciate you listening today, and I look forward to talking to you next week.